Do you feel drawn to learn more about spirituality, witchcraft, and the occult, but feel lost on where to start? Then welcome to Get In Loser, We're Doing Witchcraft, a podcast all about what it means to be a witch and where to get started on your journey. Join us as we navigate through various witchy topics and share what we have learned about the craft. So get in, witches, and join us as we discuss witchcraft throughout history. Also, a brief warning, as this episode includes foul language and mentions of death and torture.
Anyways, two idiots making a podcast.
That's what we should have named it. Not We're Doing Witchcraft.
Making a podcast.
Two idiots making a podcast. New title.
We're changing it.
Changing it.
Just
right
update
now.
all of our stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Two idiots making a podcast.
Yeah, change all the branding. So episode 1. I'm so glad we're finally here.
No, I'm excited.
So what are we talking about? We're talking about the history of witchcraft.
History of witchcraft. A dark, depressing, sad history of witchcraft with a sprinkle of positive.
Just a little bit, not too much. We
can't let you be too happy.
Just know it was all shit, and
all of it.
That's the end. That's the end of the podcast. We wanted to start episode 1 with a very brief history of witchcraft because not only is it fascinating, but we also think it's important to highlight the history of the craft and understand just how far back beliefs in the occult stretch. So many people believe that witches and witchcraft are Christian inventions from a time where witch hysteria was prevalent and used as a tool to reinforce male-dominated authority. But there is countless documented evidence of witches, spells, and the occult that predate Christianity.
So we're going to be looking at how witches and witchcraft throughout history have been looked at through both a negative and positive lens. So when we're talking about the negative views, this was often like demonizing witches, right? Or demonizing women. So they believed that witches were heretics who worked for or in league with the devil, or they made pacts with the devil. The devil's whore, consort, or handmaiden were often terms used to describe a witch, and they were giving it that sexual element. They were hypersexualizing women and making it to be like witchcraft. They called them sorceresses, enchantresses, cannibals. So there was a human sacrifice, infant sacrifice, and consumption, which is just preposterous. And then sexual deviance. So again, going back into that sexual element, women were sexual, hypersexual, therefore they were witches.
Gross.
Disgusting. It goes all throughout history and it's so gross. I cringed researching all of this. It was so gross. So then the positive views, this kind of predated the witch trials or the witch hysteria, right? So before all of that happened, witches were looked at as being wise or cunning women. A king always had an advisor that was a witch. They had weird or wayward sisters that were their prophets. They helped to make decisions in a kingdom. Healers that were adept in herbs, potions, tonics. These were women that were too advanced for their time. So they were before the times of like science and medicine. It was all like superstition. So if they knew these things, they were considered to be witches. Midwives, they helped birth babies, but then later that became witchcraft. Like if you knew what was going on with a pregnancy, or, you used an old wives' tale to tell the sex of the baby, you were clearly a witch. Clearly. So something that I found that I couldn't find any like serious documentation on, but it came up multiple times in some of the research was cleansers. And I'm sure like a lot of this comes into what we do even today for cleansing rituals, like whether it's burning mugwort or sage, or I've heard ringing a bell to clear like stagnant energy. They used cleansers to rid homes of negative energy, but I couldn't find anything. So like nothing to like tell what they were doing or who used them or for like the reasons that they used them, other than it was just to clear a negative energy.
I wonder if that ties into that belief. What is it called? Is that miasma or something? That sounds terrible.
That sounds like
miasma. I think it's called miasma. I could be making this up, but there was this whole belief like a couple hundred years ago, or maybe even like 100 years ago. So it's probably relatively new, where like fresh air could cure your illness or some shit. Like, and so people would
So they do that in Germany. I lived in Germany for several years.
Mm-hmm.
So in the mornings, you were supposed to, so a lot of their windows will tilt backwards. And if you've ever lived in Europe, you probably know this. You don't have to open the window fully. You can tilt it. And that is to clear out like the stagnant air of the house. They would hang their bed sheets and blankets and pillows and stuff out the windows too, to air them out and let the sun kill the bacteria. And this was like, some people, we had an elderly like couple that lived across the street, and they would do this daily. So every day they would hang their blankets and pillows and stuff out the window and let the sun like kill the bacteria and air them out. But every morning, like you opened your windows to let fresh air into the house.
Oh,
so I don't know if that's where it comes from. I just know that that's what we did when we lived in Germany.
I feel like it makes sense though, because they say too, even with like COVID, you're supposed to like open your windows and shit.
Yeah, it's good to air it out.
Yeah, air it out, cleanse the space.
And then the last thing that I had on the positive view for this, at least for now, we do have a little more later, but women were looked at as divine, revered, or sacred, and a lot of times referred to as goddesses. And at this time, like prior to witch hysteria, they looked at like Hecate, Freya, Circe, Lilith, Inanna, Isis, Ashara, and even sometimes Eve as falling into this category of being like worthy of worship, looking to for like guidance or, whatever their daily tasks were, they would look to a revered woman. Throughout history, many witches were considered healers or hallowed members of their community. So like if, back before witch hysteria, they would look to the village witch for if you had a son who had a fever or a husband who had pain, you went to the village witch and got advice or some form of medical help through herbs. So tinctures, tonics, teas, salves, these kinds of things.
Oh, that's really interesting. Whenever you were going over how they would serve as king's advisors and stuff like that, it reminded me, I don't know much about Nostradamus, but it reminded me of that show Rain. And like in the show, like they had a Nostradamus character. Yeah. And he was like an advisor to, I think it was the queen, might have been the king too. And he could like some sort of magic powers where he could see into the future or something.
Yeah. So I would always kind of like, for this kind of more modern pop culture reference that would kind of make sense to this, Game of Thrones. The one, I think he was a Baratheon, I can't remember, but he had the Red Priestess. And they followed they had like the what was he, like the God of Light or something like that. Where she ended up like burning a child at the stake.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things wrong with this show series, whatever. But he used her kind of as his advisor. She guided him through everything, and she had weird like rituals that she did as his advisor to help him in the end. I know there's other references, but I feel like that's a more modern one that most people would probably know, because I feel like everybody watched Game of Thrones.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That is the truth. I haven't watched it in so long. It's hard for me to rewatch it just because the last 2 seasons were so bad.
Sucked. And he won't put out the last book. Like, I'm somebody who read the books and then the show came out, and I was like, first of all, there are so many things wrong with this show that just, they demonize, like obviously Jaime Lannister was just not a great character, period, because they had that weird like sister brother sexual thing, but he was a very complex character in the books, and he never once raped Cersei. But in the show, they definitely have a scene where he rapes his sister over their dead son. Great. Whereas like in the books, they do have sex during that, but it was very consensual. There was no rape.
Ugh, yeah, I read the books too. I don't even remember. It's been so long.
I loved those books, but
so good.
He's too busy playing bubble soccer to put out the last one. So
we're just in suspense forever. I think somebody should just write a really amazing like fan fiction.
Right? Especially since he said that he wasn't going to change what they did.
Which is stupid because that would never happen.
Yeah, he said he would like maybe change how they got there, but he wouldn't change the ending. And that made me very sad because it did not end well.
It did not end well.
No.
Poor Jon Snow. He really does know nothing.
I know.
To end up like go through all that shit die, come back to life, and be in prison.
Can we talk about that cliffhanger though?
Yeah, terrible.
Jon Snow's death.
That was the worst. And like, as I remember, it ended, I can't remember exactly if that ended one of the books. I think it did. But then like, I didn't have the next book or something. And I was just like, I gotta get this book like right now. But, and the fact that they would do that too in the show, I knew it was coming and it still was painful.
It really was.
It's terrible.
Yeah. Poor Jon Snow and beautiful Kit Harington.
Oh, yeah.
Let's be honest.
All right. Anyway. Back on topic.
Yeah. Okay. So in the Middle East, ancient civilizations worshipped powerful female deities. So there were rituals that women would practice where they would like, maybe get up and light a candle or say a prayer and thank the goddess for things. And while not all, but while some people practiced it, women were just the more ritualistic about it. So it would be like every morning I got up, I lit a candle, and I thanked whichever goddess I was worshiping at this time. Priestesses were trained in sacred arts and were known as wise women, and they were some of the earliest manifestations of what we recognize as the witch today. Wise women made house calls, they delivered babies, dealt with things like infertility or impotence, and they were seen as positive figures in society. So just going back to a time when if you had an ailment, an illness, a pain, or whatever, you would go to that person in your village that you knew practiced what they believed to be witchcraft at the time, and you would get, a tonic, a tincture, a salve, or whatever to help cure these ailments. There wasn't like a stigma to it. It was, I have a problem, this person can solve it, so let me go ask them. It wasn't like, keep it hush hush, like during Puritan times. Don't let them know that I got an herb from a witch, because then I'll be hanged with the witch kind of thing. It was just, everybody was like, oh yeah, this person knows how to fix these problems, let me go to them. And then back to what we were talking about with like serving as the king's advisors, kings required their counsel. So there wasn't a king that didn't have an advisor that was considered a witch. They helped them make decisions, talk things through. They did rituals to give the armies or warriors, whatever they called them back. They gave them kind of a positive, like, I'm going out to battle, but this ritual has been done to ensure that we have a good outcome. They just never went out without a wise woman's ritual being performed first. And then again, babies could not be born without their presence. So kings needed a witch on their advisory so that when their heirs were born, they had somebody there to deliver the baby. It's just, kings always had a witch.
What a fucking awesome time to be alive and be a witch.
Right? Let me deliver the king's baby. And also let me do this ritual so that his armies go out and they have a good war, because my king needs to run this kingdom. And how else do we topple a kingdom but to kill their king? So we need a witch to make sure that doesn't happen.
So in less pleasant witch news or history, I guess.
Back to the depressing.
Back to the depressing, less pleasant news. Why do I keep saying news? I'm trying to say history. During the time of Julius Caesar, so this is roughly around 3rd century BCE, he encountered the Druid. And, we are going to have a future episode on Druidism and the Druids, but just like briefly a little bit about them. The Druids derived from the Celtic word meaning knower of the oak tree. And the Druids acted as priests, teachers, and judges. And they received 20 years of training where they learned the lore of the gods, astronomy, natural philosophy, and they studied the ancient verse. Supposedly they offered human sacrifices, but I'm not sure how true this information is, because the thing about the Druids is everything that we know comes from what has been documented about them. There's no actual documentations that they have put down, no history that they have left. So really all records that we have come from, for instance, Julius Caesar, who wrote extensively about them. And I believe honestly was probably just scared because they believed differently than what he believed. And because of that, obviously, I'm assuming that they were perceived in a very negative light. I mean, as we know, history is written by the victors, and because the Druids were suppressed by the Roman Emperor under Tiberius, we will never really know if like human sacrifices were a thing or if it was something invented by the Romans as a way to justify their actions. And So, which really sucks because
yeah,
I
I feel like this was a theme that I ran into a lot when we were doing research for this, is that they would mention things, but there would be no known documentation or and I know it's something we're going to talk about later in this episode, but like things that are documented as the first, I'm doing quotations. I know you guys can't see that. I'm doing quotations, but things that are documented as the first known cases of witchcraft or like mentions of witchcraft are noted to be documents that came out in the 1400s. And so I have a hard time believing that that is the first time that something was actually documented.
Right.
So it's just, it seems to be a common theme for this history, this specific history.
Yes. Yeah. And especially too, considering like during that time would have been the start of all the witch hysteria. I feel like you can't really trust any of the first known documents that are out.
Yeah.
You know, kind of moving on from that to more of a, I guess, fictional representation of witchcraft and throughout history. Witches are seen in Homer's The Odyssey. There's discussions, like we had mentioned earlier, of Circe. She is a goddess of magic, and she is described in Homer's Odyssey as a nymph daughter of Helios, who was banished for using magic to turn a rival into a monster. In Homer's Odyssey, the character of Circe is seen as lustrous with lovely braids, and she turns Odysseus's men into pigs. And while it's obviously just a work of fiction, often fiction can mirror reality or derive its inspiration from reality. So really, I mean, because of that, I don't think that Homer just plucked the term witch or goddess or sorcerer or just magic in general from the air. He wasn't the one who created any of these words. So obviously he's picking different themes that were already present in society and during that time. So somewhere, I mean, not really all around that time, hundreds of years later. Like around that time, not even close.
2 days later.
2 days later. Hundreds of years after that. So we're talking like 100 AD. Plutarch released his treatise on superstition, which in it, he refers to witchcraft as an attempt to prove superstition is worse than atheism. And they talk about magic charms or spells, rushing about and beating of drums, and pure purifications and dirty sanctifications. I'd like to know a little bit more about exactly what he...
what are these dirty sanctifications?
Because maybe I want to be involved. Barbarous and outlandish penances and mortifications at the shrines. What he's trying to say throughout this entire long, I couldn't even read it all because it was just so much. This whole thing that he put out, he is basically saying that superstition provides the seeds from which atheism springs, and superstitious actions are ridiculous. And basically, there should be no gods at all than gods who accept with pleasure such acts of worship.
Nice.
Which, you know, he sounds like he lived the most boring life ever. I mean,
sounds real fun at a party.
Real fun. The worst.
But again, this goes back to what I was saying with the documentation portion of it. I was trying to find what is the oldest documentation of witchcraft. And if you look at the Library of Congress, they literally say that the oldest documentation of witchcraft, period, is the Malleus Maleficarum. And that wasn't until like the end of the 1400s. Right. But here we have 100 AD documentation. The history is so skewed.
It really is. Yeah.
And
it's really frustrating because it's like, especially whenever you're looking at it as a way to like research it, to educate others, and then to, I mean, not even just educate others, but
even also, just educating yourself.
Yeah.
Even trying to find out what is the history of this thing that I love, this thing that I'm into, this thing that, you know, is the way that I live my life. What is the history of it? And you can't get accurate answers.
Right. Yeah. You just know that it is.
Yeah.
And then you hear all the negative shit about it instead of, this is all the great positive things.
No, you're just an hypersexualized woman.
Right. Yeah.
Who's the downfall of everything.
Yes. Yeah. Doing your
riding your broomstick.
Doing your impure purifications and dirty sanctifications.
Dirty sanctifications.
Dirty sanctification.
I'm gonna need to look these up.
Yeah, I need to know exactly what he's talking about.
You need to get in on these dirty sanctifications.
Yes. One of the coolest things though that I found whenever I was researching this topic was about the Greek curse tablets, and I didn't even know that they were a thing. And as I was reading about them, I was just like, this is hilarious. And I kind of want to find one or some,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, I just want to make them myself and then I'll bury them too. So these are called Qataris, not to be confused with like Atari, but Qataris.
Qatari. There's a K
Qatari.
in there.
Yes. These were small tablets with a curse written onto it to ask gods and spirits to put a curse on a person or an object. The actual translation of the word Qataris is curses that bind tight. Basically, what they would do is if somebody wanted to write a Qatari about a court case, or if like they were in trouble with the law or something and they were going to court, they would write a curse and put it on this little tablet, and they would bury it either like in a graveyard or someplace that I guess would just make sense. So like in front of the courthouse or in front of somebody's home, and they would ask spirits to basically like make them botch their performance in court, forget their words, become dizzy.
Oh my gosh.
And I guess like they found since like 1993 over 1,000 curse tablets.
Everyone
all throughout
was cursing
Greece.
everyone.
Yeah, just cursing everybody left and right.
That's amazing.
Like buried like in graves, near sanctuaries, bodies of water, or like I said, places of relevance to the curse or the victim. So I'm just like, man, when did this ever stop being a thing?
Yeah. Did it stop? Do people still do this?
Right. Because it's so funny thinking about like all these ancient Greek people like writing like, okay, you know what? This asshole pissed me off today.
Look, today
Curse
Becky
tablet.
said I looked fat. So here's her curse tablet.
It's like the Greek version of the burn book.
Yeah.
But, like you bury it and you wish for something shitty to happen to that person.
And you just wait until something shitty happens and you're like, I did this.
Yeah, I did this. Yeah.
No, that's great.
I love it.
We should bring it back.
We really should.
So moving forward from that, we have my favorite topic, the Bible. So in like around 931 BC to 721 BC, you have these histories in the Bible where, you know, Christians today will say like, oh, witchcraft is bad. And I can't tell you the amount of, when researching this, the amount of anti-witch, just everything that I came across, whether it was book, article, whatever, and how to like pray the witch away from you, and hilarious, right? So in book 1 Samuel of the Bible, King Solomon has been noted to seek out the witch of Endor and to raise the spirit of the dead prophet Samuel to help defeat the Philistine army. And Samuel's guidance was sought on the outcome of the war. So the witch does. She goes, she raises the dead souls to be able to like confer with them, I guess. And so she raises Samuel, and he tells King Saul that the outcome's not going to be good, right? You're going to go to war, but it's not going to be a good outcome. And what happens? He dies in battle the next day.
What did
I find it right? They probably blamed it on the witch.
You know they did.
They did. It was the witch's fault.
Yeah.
But then you go like Old Testament, Exodus 22:18 says, "Thou shalt not suffer the witch to live," and that's kind of like the theme that Christianity runs with, right? They forget that Saul, King Saul, goes and hunts down this witch to help him raise this prophet, to tell him what the outcome is going to be, right? They're like, that never happened. No, thou shalt not suffer the witch to live.
Right. Yeah. And I wonder if like things would have turned out differently if the witch was like, oh yeah, you're totally going to win. And he won.
Gave him like a pump, put it into the universe.
Right. Yeah.
But instead he was like, can you raise the prophet and ask him? And the prophet was like, yeah, bro, it's not looking good.
Yeah. Not looking good. And you're just like, you know nothing.
Yeah. Jon Snow.
Yeah. You know nothing. And
King
then look
Solomon.
at you, loser.
Look at you,
dead.
loser. You're dead.
You're dead.
You should have not suffered a witch to live. The Bible kills me. I'm sorry.
It's a mess. It's a whole mess.
It is. It's a whole thing. So that is like more ancient history, like super ancient history. And then we move into like the 1400s and the 1600s. And this is probably the most depressing of witch history. Yeah. Hope you took your happy pills today, because
it's gonna get real sad up in this bitch.
Yeah. So 14 to 1600s is when we see witch hysteria. So I'm going to say this one more time because this is the part that we're on now. Oldest documentation is a weird term to me for the Library of Congress to have used, but I'm going to use it because that's what they said and they were my source for this. So the oldest historical documentation of witchcraft, according to the Library of Congress, is the Malleus Maleficarum, which basically translates into the Hammer of Witches. And it was published in 1487. The second one, and I'm sorry if I butcher this because I don't speak Latin, but
you don't?
How dare I?
Time.
So the second oldest, according to the Library of Congress, is the De Lamis et Pythonicis Mulieribus.
Wow.
And that comes out to be of witches and fortune tellers or diviner women. And that one was published in 1489, so 2 years later. Both of these books are held in the Library of Congress's Rare Book and Special Collections divisions and are noted to be the oldest documentation, which I don't believe, but because it says it and it's Library of Congress, I'm putting it out there. That's what they said. So the Malleus Maleficarum, if anyone has ever looked at the History of Witches, you know what that is. If you have read or watched Good Omens by Neil Gaiman, which I tell everyone to read. I've told Sam to read it like 17 times, probably just today alone.
Yeah, just today.
Just today.
Just today.
By Neil Gaiman, has the Malleus Maleficarum in it, along with the Witch Hunter General or the Witch Finder General, which we'll talk about later too. So this was a book published by, and I didn't write down, it was either 2 priests or 2 monks. I can't remember off the top of my head. But basically, they wrote this and published it, and it was meant to be a guide on how to recognize, hunt, interrogate, torture, and kill a witch. And so it was published, and nobody really thought anything about it. Some people looked at it, and they were like, whatever. This book ends up being condemned by the Catholic Church in 1490. That's why I think it's priests, but I think I read that it was monks. I'm not 100% sure on that one. I would have to go back and look. But basically, they write it, gets published, and the Catholic Church is like, yeah, no, we can't get behind this in 1490, and they condemn it. Well, this book actually goes on to become a legal documentation for people during witch hunt hysteria, and they use the book throughout the 15th and 17th century, even though it was condemned and said to be like, oh, this is not something that you should use. And it's something that's like really important to note with this book is that it was the first one to note a specific gender with witchcraft. And a quote that I took out of it says, "What else is a woman but a foe to friendship? They are evil, lecherous, vain, and lustful. All witchcraft comes from carnal lust, which is, in a woman, insatiable."
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So somebody was shot down by a woman.
Yeah.
Hate all women from here on
Hate
out.
all women. All women are witches because they're all insatiable. Their lust can't be sated. So
what a dick.
Yeah. And this is what they use to actually hunt down supposed witches, which we all know that most of the people that were accused, convicted, and executed for witchcraft during this time were innocent people.
Mm-hmm.
So moving forward with this, with the witch hunts, they often occurred as a way to explain everyday occurrences. This could be illnesses, deaths, a bad crop, or even just weather, right? So like if you and your neighbor had a disagreement and the neighbor comes over and, you guys can't hash it out and they leave angry. And then the next morning you wake up and your cow's dead. They would then turn around and accuse that neighbor saying, oh, they killed my cow with witchcraft because they were mad at me. And then that neighbor would end up going to prison, go to trial, and then be tried as a witch. And then depending on that outcome, they either lived or died, which is just wild.
That is wild. Can you imagine, like, the fuck? Why would I? If I was going to kill your cow, like I'm going to slaughter it, I'm going to eat it too.
Yeah.
I would just kill your
I
cow.
want that steak. Give me that steak.
Right. I mean, especially during that time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm sure I don't remember my history like that. We know the bubonic plague and all that shit was around the same time too. People were probably starving. If your fucking cow is not just going to drop dead because a witch is just like, and I hate you today. Your cow
die cow. Yeah, but I mean, they would do that. They would be like, oh, little Billy's sick. That must be Susie down the street practicing witchcraft. It's wild. The way that they went through this is wild. So this kind of, in England at least, starts with King James the First, right? This, I had never, like, I knew about like the witch trials and stuff. I never knew how deep it went. And when I started reading some of this stuff, it was like, what? Mind blown, right? So King James the First marries Queen Anne of Denmark. And Queen Anne, gets her entourage, her court, packs her 2 ships up with her stuff, and she's moving to England from Denmark to go be with her husband. And on the way there, they hit bad weather, right? So this storm hits, and one of the ships capsizes. Just completely, that ship's gone underwater. The ship that Queen Anne was on was badly damaged, and they knew that they could not make the rest of the trek to England because it was farther to continue on and go to England than it was to turn around and go back to Denmark. And they knew what they were going through going back to Denmark. They didn't know what the weather was going forward to England. So they turn around, go back to Denmark, and she sends a courier to let King James the First to know, like, hey, I tried to make it. I couldn't. The weather's bad. So he's like, well, I got to go get my bride. So he loads up a ship and goes to Denmark. And of course, hits bad weather on the way, but he makes it. He gets to Denmark and he starts to hear, there wasn't witch hysteria in Denmark yet, but there were already kind of accusations going on. If something was unexplainable to a person, they thought, I'm being cursed by someone. And so King James I was already a super paranoid man. He thought everyone and everything was out to kill him and take his kingdom. Because how else do you take a kingdom but kill the king? So he was just super paranoid about it. So he hears this and he's like, well, obviously Queen Anne hit bad weather. That was a witch's doing. And so they start interrogating people that were known to dislike Queen Anne or dislike him in England. And eventually, through this process, a small group of women confessed and said, yep, we are witches. We controlled the weather because we didn't want Queen Anne to get to England to you. So we did it. And these women end up going to prison, but they weren't executed. They died in prison. So King James and Queen Anne leave, go to England, and he brings witch hysteria back to England with him because he's so paranoid about everything. So every little thing that happened, it was obviously this is a witch that's out to get me. They're cursing me. They're, trying to topple the kingdom. They don't want me in charge anymore, whatever the situation. So this is kind of where we start seeing the witch hysteria come into play. This is when the Malleus Maleficarum is brought in, and eventually it's used as a guide where thousands of people are executed as a result of being accused of witchcraft. So throughout Europe, many people were accused of being witches and they confessed under torture. Witch hunts became common. They targeted women, especially a single woman or a widow, and those that were kind of in the margins of society. So they looked at the poor, the lame, again, the widows, or if you had like a boisterous personality, you were a witch.
Of course.
So there was, honestly, it was anything. If you were a woman, they could find a reason to pen you as a witch. Between the 1500s and 1660, it was estimated that about 80,000 witches were put to the death in Europe, and they were accused of working with the devil and filled with lust. So going back to that, hypersexualized or adding a sexual element into it, if a woman was sexual in any way, she was a witch, clearly. So to avoid being accused of witchcraft, neighbors would turn on each other. They would look at it as, well, if I accuse someone else of being a witch before someone accuses me of being a witch, then I'm not going to be accused of being a witch and I'm safe. So they would pick people that they didn't get along with, people they didn't know. They would just accuse them so that it kept them safe. The towns ended up turning on their poor, their outcasts, their singled and widowed, and anyone they just disliked in general. And then this comes where like British Reformation kind of transformed England from Catholic to Protestant. So during this time, people were persecuted who didn't fit desired religious profiles. So if you didn't do exactly what you were supposed to do in church, you were a witch or you were consorting with with the devil. If you weren't doing exactly what they want, if they could not control you, then clearly you were a witch. John Stern, this comes into like my favorite part of the history, right? They have something going on in the town, like things that they're considered, this is unexplainable. I don't know why my crops are doing bad. I don't know why my plow horse died and now I can't plow my fields to plant my crops. Like something's going on. So they have this town meeting. And, you know, back then when they had a meeting or whatever, everybody in the town went. The wives, the husbands, the children were present for all of these things that we're going to see moving on in the future. People from like 2 towns over would come and give input. So they're having this meeting. They're talking about weird things going on and they can't explain it. And John Stern, he's a simple landowner. He just lives in the town and he owns a piece of land and he's a man. He has no background in law, no background as a sheriff or a deputy. He's just there. He just lives there.
So of course that's like
nothing else.
No,
there's nothing else that leads to what happens.
Oh, great.
So John Stern comes forward and he says, hello, sir in charge. I forget what they called their people in charge back then, but basically
sir in charge.
Sir in charge. I have these letters, right? And these letters are from people that live in this town that are talking about who they've seen practicing witchcraft. And I think this is the reason that these things are happening. And the sir in charge takes the letters and he reads them and he's like, you know what, John Stern, I think you're right. Here's a warrant.
Great.
You now have a warrant to go and hunt witches.
With no training.
No training. No, nothing. He just owns a piece of land. He's a man. He has a penis. He owns a piece of land.
Oh, yeah.
He's given a warrant.
That's super qualified.
Right. And the only stipulation in his warrant is that he is not allowed to torture a confession. He can only interrogate. And then if they confess, turn them in, and then they'll go through the trial. So John Stern's like, thanks, sir in charge. I'm leaving now. Enter Matthew Hopkins, a young Matthew Hopkins who is 10 years younger than John Stern. He's a teenager. He says, hi, Mr. Stern, I'd like to be your apprentice.
No.
My father is a pastor and I have these skills because I was raised by my father and I'd love to help you. And John Stern's like, heck yeah, let's do this. And so John Stern and Matthew Hopkins turned this into a lucrative business. They are making money off of this. And throughout the time that they're doing this, their first trial of turning women in for being witches, they had the most convictions of any one trial just in a day. They had 15 people convicted of witchcraft and executed.
Oh my God.
And at this point, this is the most at one time that went through a trial together and were convicted. And throughout this, Matthew Hopkins appoints himself as the witch finder general. And John Stern is the witch hunter, or they called him the witch pricker. I couldn't figure out why. I couldn't find any documentation of to like what that actually meant, but he was known as either the witch hunter or the witch pricker. And they would go from town to town, and the town would pay them money to root out witches, accuse them, put them through a trial. And then they earned a very large, I couldn't find an exact sum, but they earned a very large amount of money for every single one that was found guilty. So of course, innocent people were going to be found guilty because how else were they going to get paid? Towns were raising their taxes to be able to pay John Stern and Matthew Hopkins to come into their town and hunt out witches and convict them and execute them. So they were being paid huge amounts of money for this. So this goes on for quite a while, and a bunch of people, like tons of people, are accused. Some are found not guilty, but for the most part, these people came out as convicted witches, and most of them were executed either by hanging or by burning at the stake, which is like, you know, that is like the number one when you talk about like witch history. People's like, oh, burned at the stake.
Right.
So as this goes on, anyone who spoke out against him was obviously accused of witchcraft. So there is a Reverend John Goll. He comes out after a while and he's like, this doesn't seem right. This seems sus. So he comes out and starts speaking out against Matthew Hopkins, which is a bold move, right? Because they didn't care if someone was a priest or a reverend or whatever. They would accuse accused them too. There were actual priests that were executed for witchcraft during this time. So Reverend Gohl comes out and he's like, he's a fraud. They're doing this for your money. And, you know, you're raising taxes on the townspeople to be able to pay him to come in and tell you who's a witch. If there are witches, you should know who they are because they're in your town. You know these people. So he comes out and he's like speaking, and people are like, yeah, actually, I agree with you. And so at this point, Matthew Hopkins decides, I'm going to go on the defense and I'm going to go on the attack, and I'm going to publish this pamphlet that says why I'm not a fraud and why what I'm doing is God's work. And he entitles this pamphlet A Discovery of Witches. And this is his actual downfall, because he put so many lies in this pamphlet that the average person could look at it and be like, he seems like a crazy pants. Like, this isn't real. And so people started to look at him and be like, you, sir, are a fraud. And before they could even take him to trial for the things that he did, he dies of tuberculosis. So he never actually got held accountable. But it is estimated that Matthew Hopkins himself ended up leading more than 200 people to their execution. Just himself, not the stuff that he did with John Stern. Just his own convictions and executions was 200 plus convicted witches.
That's terrible.
Yeah, horrible, right? During this time also, if you looked at France and Germany, they had some of the worst persecution rates of the time. 16th century Wurzburg, which is in Germany, condemned over 600 people to death just in their town at one time, not like multiples. Okay, this is a total sum. One visit from the Inquisitor condemned 600 people and executed them. Of that 600, 19 of them were priests, 41 of them were children.
Jesus.
Children executed for witchcraft. And many towns within the area, if the Inquisitor came through just to protect themselves, the men would accuse all women in the town. All the women are joint witches, and they would execute every woman in their town. Like, I don't know how we have a human race today.
Right. Yeah.
Like, you need women.
What
you
a
cannot.
terrible time to be alive. Did
Right?
men not understand how that worked? Like,
it was more, from what I could get from this period of time, it was more of, how do I keep myself from being accused while I accuse other people?
Oh.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? Because, you know, like, these men too, they had mothers and wives and
daughters
and daughters.
And,
they're like,
and they're just like,
what?
all of you're all witches.
Yeah. Bye.
Mm-hmm.
Yeetus fetus.
Yeah. Wild. But I also loved it. I loved reading all of these things because it is wild. It's just the fact that we got to a point in history where people were like, you know what? To save myself, burn all the women.
Right. Yeah. Just to be on the safe side.
It won't really affect my conscience if I burn Susie down the street because I don't know her. So she's clearly a witch.
Yeah, clearly. Her name starts with an S. So
yeah. S for witches.
Yeah.
That makes no sense. Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. And now you're a witch because you said it didn't make sense. And
if it doesn't make sense to you, you're clearly a witch.
Yeah, clearly. Now, when you were talking about all of the literally, it could be you are too poor, or you have too much money, or you're crippled, or something like that. Then it reminded me of that Parks and Recreation, whenever the guy from South America came, and he just like, right to jail.
If you look poor, at me, to jail. If you're poor, jail.
Yeah. Have too much money, right to jail.
Right to jail. No, but I mean, that was basically it. It was like, you're a woman, you're a witch, you're single, definitely a witch, you're totally sexual witch. Deviant, right to witch.
Yeah. Your husband died?
Oh, witch. You have one leg? Witch.
Yeah. You have two legs? Witch.
No, that is, so I watched this. I don't remember which documentary it was, but there was a woman, she was widowed, poor. She lived on the outskirts of town and she had one leg, and they used all of these against her and condemned her, and they hung her. They, like, in the documentary, they reenacted like the actual document that they read. So there was like actual like physical documentation of what happened to this woman from that time, like the court case, and they read it and reenacted it. And it was was like them having to lift this crippled woman who has one leg up onto a stool while they're putting a noose around her neck and pushing her off. Like,
oh my God.
Yes. And she was accused because her husband died. She was poor. She lived on the outskirts of town and she had one leg. So that was the one leg was considered her devil's mark, which is what they, if they accuse someone a lot of times, which I think I have this written down in the torture portion, but they would strip women naked in front of the entire town looking for some mark on their skin or a blemish, and they would call it their devil's mark or their witch's mark. And that meant that they made a pact with the devil and they had sex with the devil. And during consummating the pact of them becoming a witch and doing the devil's work, he marked them in some way. And if the average person has at least one mark on their skin, whether it's a freckle, a mole, a scar, whatever. But they used that as she has one leg, therefore she's a witch. That's her devil's mark.
That's insane. And what about all the men with scars?
Right. Moles,
and freckles, and
who knows what else?
Just women.
And actually, it's funny that you say that because I didn't see any of that in history used. Like anything that I read, none of that was used on men. It was always women where they looked for a devil's mark or a witch's mark. I never saw any documentation in the stuff that I read that they ever did that to men. With men, they usually ended up torturing a confession out of them. But
with women, they would get to the torturing part.
Yeah.
First, let's strip you down and humiliate you in front of everybody that you know.
In front of the entire town and everyone's pet dogs.
Yeah.
Because they came to the meetings too.
Of course, yeah. Their children, the dogs, the cows.
Your third cousin from 3 towns over.
Yeah. Just as bad as what's going on in Europe. Obviously, a lot of people, whenever they think about witches and witch trials and witch hysteria, America always has to come in and try to steal a thunder. Yep. We got to try to do it worse.
Outshine everybody.
Outshine everyone and do it
We're
even
the
worse.
best.
Right. So during the Puritan times, anything that stepped out of their beliefs was blamed on witchcraft and consorting with the devil. So illnesses or fits were said to be a witch's curse. Often the accused were single, widowed, old, poor, quarrelsome reputations. That is a hard word to say.
That is a hard word.
Reputation. They were either crippled or had some other deformity or abnormality, had aggressive personalities, and mostly women, although some men were also executed as witches. So back to that whole right to jail.
Yep. Right to jail.
Right to jail.
You breathed to jail.
Jail.
Yeah. And it's just wild to me that like beliefs can be so ingrained into a person that it's like, oh no, this is what we believe. And so there's no gray area. It's black or white. You're either God-fearing person or you're working with the devil.
And there's no like, can I just be a good person?
No.
And live?
To jail.
No.
Right to jail.
Right to jail.
Yeah.
The Salem witch trials and everything that went on in Massachusetts could be like an entire like podcast series.
It really
could. Essentially, Elizabeth Parris and Abigail Williams, they began suffering from fits, body contortions, uncontrolled screaming. And really at the time, it was obviously had to be a witch. Had to be. They were cursed somehow. Tituba.
Who else acts like that?
Yeah. No one.
Yeah. But I think it's important to note too that like when we say fits, like when they say, oh, they were having fits, these are things that, so this is more a time when superstition outweighed science. And so when a person was said to be having fits, that could have been epilepsy. It could have been mental health issues, whether it be schizophrenia or hallucinations or whatever. Like that's what they categorized as fits. So these are actually like scientific reasons to why a person is having these issues. I even read one that was talking about, the child was 9, right? And you're think about a Puritan time frame where you're living where you have to go to church for hours on end on Sunday. You can't step out of line because if you do, you're clearly a witch. Children have energy. So if they're running around the room and they have wild imaginations, that's a fit. And they're clearly under a witch's curse.
Of
So
course.
I think
Yeah.
it's like important that people realize that this is what they considered witchcraft during this time.
It's terrible. And it could even just, I'm angry at you and I'm expressing my anger.
Clearly a witch's curse, right to jail.
Right to jail. You're fucked. You raise your voice at me.
To jail.
Witch.
You little
That's
shit.
what you
You're
are.
a witch.
Yeah, you're a witch. You're not going to mind me in the supermarket? Okay. You know what?
Witch.
You're cursed. Witch.
To jail.
Yeah,
We laugh, but this is actually what happened.
Yeah, we have to laugh through the tears because it is so sad. But you know what? You have to bring some humor to some dark situations, and
you
it's
have
okay.
to. That's how
You
we
have
survive.
to. But I mean, even with the uncontrolled screaming and the body contortions and the fits that these two girls were having, now they're thinking that they could have totally been caused by a fungus that caused spasms and delusions. So, I mean, don't eat the fucking mushrooms in the woods, guys. Like, just.
But you gotta think this is also a time when people are so poor and starving that like they are harvesting their own food. So who's to say they didn't pick the wrong herb or the wrong mushroom?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, and we'll have more on episode 2 about the Salem witch trials and everything. Yeah. So, I mean, but essentially during this time, mass hysteria ensued after all of this uncontrolled screaming and fits and
well, and I know
pointing.
Well, and they go to this whole trial, and I know that like now in a lot of documentation or even just like documentaries on this, they believe that a lot of it was because women were so oppressed during this Puritan time. Like you were nobody without a husband. Your husband owned land. Your husband made money. So you were just there to bear children and serve him. They believe that a lot of the mass hysteria that happened in the courtroom, which we'll probably talk about more in the next episode, but they go to trial and there's this whole show about it, right? So one girl will start saying, "Oh, she's choking me. I can't breathe." And then everybody starts, "I can't breathe. I can't breathe." So it's like a way for them to be able to have this outlet to be who they are or whatever without somebody oppressing what they're doing. So it was like they could act out and do these crazy things and they wouldn't get in trouble for it because, well, we're under a witch's curse.
Right.
That was like a thing that I saw in multiple documentaries where they're like, this was probably exactly what was happening because they were so oppressed that this was the one time that they could lash out or act out and not get in trouble for it because it wasn't their fault. It was a witch's fault.
Yeah. When it was all said and done, 150 people were accused and 18 were put to death. 6 men were accused and executed as well. And obviously, as we mentioned before, it's important to note that none of these people were actually witches. Not that even if they were, it would have been a thing that obviously would have been okay to torture and kill them and put them through the trial, but none of these people were actually witches.
No, these were innocent people that just lived in the wrong time or looked the wrong way at this time.
Yeah. It's crazy. And then I also saw too, whenever I was researching witchcraft in America and the history of it, there's not a lot listed, but the first actual documented person in America to be executed for witchcraft was a young girl named, I mean, she wasn't young. I think she was like a teenager or something, but it happened in Windsor, Connecticut, and her name was Alice Young, and it was in 1644. Nope, that's wrong. 1647. If I could read. There's not a whole lot about her, which really sucks. Like I couldn't find really a lot about her or her family or why, which is really sad.
I found that a lot of this history is that way. You can find a lot about the witch hysteria in England, copious amounts of information about that. But the problem that I ran into with a lot of that was so much of it was conflicting. You would read one article that would say, this amount of people were executed. Then you would read another article that would say a completely different number. So it was just a lot of this was hard to find actual, like real hard data for it. So that's a hard one because you can't really say much on it, but you want to note that these things happened.
And she probably, was executed for something ridiculous.
Yeah.
even being like, I hate you. You fucked up something of mine and I'm angry at you. And right to jail.
There was one, I like to do like a mixed medium when I research. So I'll do like YouTube videos or, History Channel or Discovery Channel documentaries. And one of them, I don't remember which one, basically it tells the story of a young girl who she was walking through the woods and she comes across a peddler and he has these wares for sale, but he's trying to get to where he's going by a certain time. And she is very demanding. She wants something that he has and he's come to the market and you can buy it. And she's like, nope, not going to do that. You're going to give it to me now. And he won't. Well, they get worked up. They get into this heated argument and she whispers things under her breath to make him feel uneasy, like she was cursing him. Well, on the way to the market after leaving, the man dies. And someone was present when that happened. He ended up having a heart attack and dying. And he was an old man. So it's likely that he just died for being old, he was old. He had a heart attack. His heart gave out. But because someone else was present and they saw the altercation between them, they went and told the town that a witch cursed him in the woods and the girl ends up being executed.
Of course.
Moving forward from all of that depressive stuff, we're going into more fun depressive stuff, which is the means of torture that they used for witches. So when we talked about John Stern and Matthew Hopkins, I made sure to note that in the warrant that Stern was given, it was written that he wasn't allowed to torture people to get them to confess to witchcraft. And Hopkins and Stern basically found a way around this by not doing it themselves. They would have someone else torture them. Or during this time, it was also not considered torture to deprive someone of sleep. So a lot of people that ended up confessing would have been kept up for days on end. There was one documented case, and he was actually a priest, a priest who was accused of witchcraft. They kept him up for 4 days straight. And every time he would start to fall asleep, they would pick him up and make him run across the room. And then eventually by day 4, he's like, I can't live my life like this. I need a nap.
Right.
So he was like, sure, I'm a witch. Does that mean this stops? And so they tell him like, oh, we need you to confess to also working with the devil. And he was like, no, I'm a priest. Like, I will not taint my soul that way. So they get him to say he's a witch, but he 100% is like, I never made a pact with the devil. And so they're like, okay, they find him guilty. They're going to execute him. And Stern basically says, I can get a priest to come and reside over your execution and read your rights. And he's like, I don't trust you. Like, I'm a man of God and I'm innocent. And you have accused me of witchcraft and you're going to kill me for that. I'll read my own rights. So they led him to the gallows. They let him have his Bible in his hands, and he read his own rights as they were standing him up on a stool and putting a noose around his neck. After they kept him up for days on end to get him to confess that he was a witch.
That's terrible. So, anybody would confess.
Yeah. So there's actually I read so many actual documented cases of this happening where they would, if the person would start to fall asleep, they'd make a loud noise or they would yell witch or whatever to keep them awake until they eventually confessed, which is, sleep deprivation is now considered a form of torture. Back then, that was not considered torture. So a lot of times they did use that in place of actual torture. But some of the other methods they used, they had this thing called the pillywinks, which is also known as a thumb screw. And it's basically 2 boards with a screw on each end. And they would place your hand in between this and they would tighten it. And they would ask you, are you a witch? And if you said no, they would tighten it more. And most people walked away from this particular torture device with a completely maimed, unusable hand. If they got out of this alive and they were not seen to be a witch and they were not executed or thrown in prison, they were not able to use that hand by the end of this. Another one that was just completely disgusting, but also fascinated me was wrenching. I had never heard of this one. Basically, it's 2 people that were interrogating the witch would take a rope and wrap it around their head and stand on opposite ends, and they would pull. And then they would ask, are you a witch? And you would say no. And they would pull, and they would just keep pulling and pulling and pulling until basically you confessed and you walked away with simply rope burn on your face and head, or they crushed your skull.
Oh, gross.
Yeah. And they even had a mechanism later that they used for it where they could tighten screws to pull the ropes tighter and tighter and tighter until they just crushed your whole head.
Who even would think of these things? I could never think of, you know what I would love to do?
Let me tie a rope around someone's head.
Humans are terrible.
Humans are terrible, especially left to our own devices.
Mm-hmm.
Garroting, I think is how you say it, is basically a form of strangulation, but it's done with a wire. And so most of the time, as they would tighten the cord, it would cut into the flesh. So, and a lot of people, it would like sever windpipes or arteries or whatever. And they also, again, they had a screw mechanism. So later on, so they would just put you into this thing and then tighten and tighten and tighten until it would basically decapitate some people. Starvation and dehydration are just common ones that were used. They didn't require anything. You just withheld water and food. And eventually people would start losing their shit because they're really hungry and really thirsty.
I would not last a day.
No, look, I drink water, like 1.5 gallons of water a day. I would literally die. So, and then swimming the witch. And this one's always funny to me because if you've watched Monty Python and the Holy Grail, they have an entire witch scene where they accuse a woman of being a witch and they're like, look at her nose. And she's like, they put this nose on me. And it ends up being like a fake nose, Yes. So then they come to terms that like, okay, well, I can't remember exactly how they say it, but it's basically like, a duck floats in water. If she floats, she's a witch. So they like put her in the water and they're like, oh, she's a witch. And they go through the whole thing. Well, swimming the witch is basically where they would bind your hands and feet together and toss you in a body of water. If you float, you're a witch. And so they would pull you out and either, hang you or burn you at the stake or beat you to death or whatever, whatever they chose that day. If you sunk, you were innocent. And majority of the people that were innocent died because they were tied up and in the bottom of the water, like under the water. And most of the time they died before anyone could pull them out. So they looked at it as, well, yeah, they died, but they died an innocent soul. So they still got to be with the Lord. They got to go to heaven. Yeah. Yeah. So swimming the witch, that's where that one comes from. And then your typical beating, hanging, burning at the stake, which we've already talked about. Something else that I found really cool from this part of the research is that the term the third degree comes from this period of time, from the witch hysteria period of time. There were apparently 3 degrees of torture. So the first kind of was just like your basic interrogation and just putting people through really stressful situations. Your second elevated a little bit, trying to get that confession. And usually the 3rd degree killed the witch is how they looked at it. So when people say, oh, you're giving me the 3rd degree, that's actually where that comes from.
Yeah, that's really
that little tidbit.
Yeah.
It's not like a big thing in witch history, but I liked that little tidbit.
I mean, even though it comes from a very terrible, terrible part.
Yeah. It's relevant today.
It's relevant. Yeah. Well, going on to a little bit lighter of a topic.
I had to bring the doom and gloom first.
Yeah, the doom and gloom comes first. Thankfully, we're able to move on to something a little bit lighter. So in the late 1800s, throughout this time, there was a revival across Europe for people who wanted to rediscover their indigenous cultures, to include Saxon and Norse traditions and traditional village songs and dances. Traditional tales were written down and recorded, and old festivals were celebrated. And there was a pretty famous lady. Her name was Madame Helena, probably going to butcher it, Blavatsky.
I've listened to so many podcasts that use a lot of the history of Madame Blavatsky.
Really? Oh,
yeah.
See,
yeah,
it was new for me. So you're going to have to let me know if I'm like butchering what she does. But so in 1875, she founded the Theosophical Society. And this was based on teachings on Hinduism, Tibetan Buddhism, Neoplatonic thought, and ancient Egyptian religion, which are all pagan philosophies that were polytheistic and worship nature. So obviously helping with that revival to kind of get back to ancient traditions and traditional practices that for a while were lost and not written down because right to jail. So
straight to jail.
So, and then in early 20th century, Guido von List, he pioneered the study of runes. Basically what we're doing today whenever we read runes and stuff comes from his studies. And then obviously too, we'll have more episodes and just information on Wicca, but just as like a general kind of blurb about it in 1950s. Gerald Gardner, he is the founder of Wicca, just in general, was founded in the 1950s, which a lot of people may not know, because while it is a quote unquote new religion, it stems from very ancient practices and ancient beliefs. And so essentially he claimed he spoke for one of several covens of English witches that practiced a pagan religion dating back to Stone Age times. He named it after the Anglo-Saxon term for craft of the wise, and it follows the tenet of harm none. Wicca practices use herbs and other natural elements to promote healing, harmony, love, and wisdom. So just a little bit about that.
Much more lighthearted than the torture.
Much more lighthearted. We need all the love and harmony and healing.
Yes. So moving out of that, in the 60s and 70s, we kind of started seeing this more like a revival of witchcraft. So I found these cute things, and I don't know if you got a chance to look at them when I sent them to you, but there was a women's magazine in the early 1900s that gave Halloween party advice, and they came up with these cute little Halloween postcards with women depicted on them being witchy, but they were all like beautiful women. It wasn't that the green skin with the wart on the nose and cackling over a cauldron. Like, they actually made it really cute, and they were saying, maybe for Halloween this year you do a mixed sex courtship ritual, and it made Halloween more palatable to what they called the decade's new woman, while depicting witches as being beautiful, alluring. And this continued into the 1960s when they came out with the TV show Bewitched,
which was a gem.
It was. I was going to say, I don't know if you ever watched it, but I, as a child, watched that with my grandparents. My grandparents absolutely loved Bewitched. Like, we watched it all the time. I absolutely loved it. And I actually went back recently and watched the first, the pilot episode of it before she tells them, when they get married, before she tells them that she's a witch. It was so cute. So this was more the time of radical social change, right? So paganism, shaped by Hinduism and Taoism, and the Eastern religions and philosophies helped to shape pagan and witchcraft practices that we know today. The Native American, Afro-American traditions were explored and then rediscovered within North America. Feminism and eco-activists drawn to paganism had views of the great goddess, had inner strength and dignity, powerful and independent women. They recognized nature as being sacred, which is kind of rooted more in what you talked about earlier with the Druids and with some of Madame Blavatsky's stuff. And this is more what we're seeing today. And then another little gem that I found was the Women's International Terrorist Conspiracy from Hell. So they were an activist group that was founded in the 60s, and their acronym was witch. And so they had two other names that they were known by, also same acronym, witch. So they were either the women inspired to tell their collective history or the women interested in toppling consumerism holidays.
Nice.
Yeah. So they were focused on social change versus just toppling the patriarchy. They wanted to see these actual changes happening, not just the downfall of the patriarchy. They considered anyone that came before them that was touted as a witch or condemned as a witch to be the first guerrilla fighters against women's oppression. And they would carry out witch-like publicity stunts. So they would protest in the streets, or they would, in quotations, hex Wall Street, or give out garlic cloves to people that they passed in the streets along with little cards. And the cards would say, "We are witch, we are women, we are liberation, we are we."
Oh my God. That sounds amazing.
Right? Everything that I read on them, these women are amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And then moving into the 70s is when we start seeing witch collectives started gathering more openly. It wasn't so taboo. Of course, there's still a lot of negative, what's the word? Negative outlook. It's not the word I was going to use, but we're just going to go with that one. The negative outlook on being a witch.
Stigma.
And then, yes, stigma. There you go. I was I don't know where I was going with this, but yeah. So you see them gathering more openly. And then there was also, I don't know if I made this note or you did, but the Dianic Wicca and Dianic witchcraft were women only covens. If you made the note and you had more to share, I'm sorry, feel free to share.
Oh, no.
I know. Okay. I think I
remember.
might have just noted it. Like I wanted to make sure that we did put that in here, that there during the 70s, there were women only covens that were just, it was okay to do that. There was still kind of that weird taboo, like, oh, you know, they're gathering and practicing witchcraft because of like Christian beliefs. But it was a thing as far back as the 70s where it was just, it's okay, we're going to do this now. In 1973, the American Council of Witches was founded, and they convened in April 1974. So they were the group that drafted the set of common principles of Wicca and witchcraft in America. Sadly, they disbanded the same year because they couldn't come to an agreement outside of the 13 principles of Wiccan belief.
Oh
so they
God.
got those done, and then they were like, now we agree on nothing.
Yeah.
And so they ended. And then in 1978, Wiccan principles were actually put into a book for the Army called Religious Requirements and Practices of Certain Selected Groups. And it's a handbook for chaplains.
That's amazing.
That's a big deal for military.
Yeah.
They, for the longest time, I think Wiccan was the only one that you could put in. And I know that when I was in, my religious preference just says NA, because it was like you could either be a Christian or a Buddhist or a Wiccan, which at the time I didn't really know anything about it, and other like Christian beliefs. But it wasn't like you couldn't say like, oh, I'm a pagan. But you can now, because I know my husband, he came home all excited one day because he actually was able to change his religious preference to pagan in his military like documentation.
Yeah.
So that happened in 1978 for the military. And then in the 80s, we see this rise of actual in-person meetings or outdoor events that are hosted at hotel event centers for pagan groups. So people were actually just like, hey, we're pagan and we're here and we're going to have a meeting.
Exactly.
Versus like hiding it in their houses. And then we had, you know, in the 90s, we have the internet became a thing. And so this allowed for online groups to just spread like wildfire. Like if anyone was craft curious, they could be like, let me Google this on the internet. I don't know. Was it Google back then? I think it was like AOL back then, but
Yeah.
I can't remember.
MSN.
What are Bing.
Bing. What was the one with the dog? Was that Bing?
I don't remember.
There were so
many weird ones. But anyways, you could go on and you could search it. And this could take you to chat rooms or whatever with other people who were also craft curious or people who practiced, but, you know, they didn't have an outlet to share it. And then at this point, this is when people start turning more to science away from the supernatural. So you're not accusing your neighbor of being a witch for whatever reason, for your cow dying, for little Billy having a fever. Like that died out. And by the earliest 20th century is kind of when we started seeing different connotations of the witch. And a lot of this came from Hollywood, taking these Christian beliefs and running with them. So witches being evil women, they were green skin and cackled over cauldrons and always had a black cat and wore pointy hats and capes and whatever. As time goes on, pop culture sensationalizes the witch. So every horror movie, well, not every, obviously there's different monsters, but there are so many horror movies out there now that they're based on witches. The Blair Witch, or there is a horror movie just called The Witch, and it's centered on a young girl as she's coming into puberty. And as she comes into puberty, she gets her power and she exacts revenge on people. So you're seeing a lot of that in Hollywood, and you see it in books. Like I've talked about Good Omens a million times. But you see like Harry Potter, that was like sensationalized everywhere, right? Everybody knows Harry Potter. Even if you've never read it, you've probably seen at least one of the movies and you know the basis of it, but you know that it's like centered around witchcraft. So at this point, it's cool to be into it. Not necessarily, there's still a stigma to like practicing or being a witch, but it's cool to read or it's cool to watch. Or
it's not like you're going to go right to jail for just being a little bit different.
No more right to jail, but it's,
no more right to jail.
It's going to be like, maybe you're a weirdo.
Yeah.
And then we both came across a quote.
Yes, it's amazing.
It's absolutely beautiful. I don't know if you wanted to read it.
Sure, I can read it. So this quote came from Jess Bergman from a literary history of witches in 2015. And it says, and while there's a broad spectrum of witch stories out there, there's a through line common to them all. Witches are women whose embodiment of femininity in some way transgresses society's accepted boundaries. They are too old, too powerful, too sexually aggressive, too vain, too undesirable.
Wow.
What a way to sum it up.
It goes back into everything that we talked about in this history.
Mm-hmm.
It even adds the sexually aggressive. It's always like surrounded around hypersexualized women or women that just don't fit society's norms.
We're just going to persecute them. Just because.
Straight to jail. Sexually aggressive, right to jail. That's it for this episode of Get In, Loser, We're Doing Witchcraft. You can find our source material for this episode linked in the show notes. If you loved the episode, we'd appreciate if you left us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you really, really like the show and you want to get more Get In, Loser content, check out our Supercast link provided in the show notes, or you can search our show on the Supercast website. There you can purchase a subscription to our podcast and obtain exclusive perks like getting episodes early, getting a shout out on the show, access to our Ask Me Anything forum, a monthly newsletter, and a promo code for merchandise, and even more. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Get In Witches, or send us an email at weirddoingwitchcraft@gmail.com. Check us out next week, where we will sit down and explore the stigma surrounding witchcraft and non-Judeo-Christian beliefs and how witches and witchcraft are portrayed in the media. Until then, blessed be witches.